Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year. And plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
I think there's a misconception about you don't have to dominate at the line of scrimmage. Like, there's really 3 or 4 points to win, right? It's you can win at the release, you can win in the stem, you can win at the break point, you can win at the catch point.
We continue on with Accelerate Everything in another episode in Season 2. And today we're going to talk receiver play. We've had quarterback experts on here before, and so I think it's exciting to get into the other end of that. And Dub, love what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about Mike Vannucci.
Yeah, Mike's just a guy I ran across on social media and saw the content he's pushing out and saw all of the just the high-level stuff just normal guys were doing. And so I was like, you know what, I'm seeing like average, players and athletes execute some really high-level fundamental things that receivers got to be good at. And this can really apply to the world we live in as a high school coach. So I sought him out, and he has a lot of great stuff out there on YouTube and things like that, and really unpacked some deep intricacies on route break mechanics in this episode.
Looking forward to this one, Dub, and we'll be back after the interview with Dub's takeaways.
Our guest today is Mike Vannucci. Mike is the owner and operator of the Long Island Wide Receiver Academy. Prior to that, Mike played Division III football at William Patterson University, where he's a 4-year starter and team captain. After college, Mike had a successful professional career in Europe. Since his professional career, Mike has coached 7 years at the high school and Division II level. Mike, I'm a big fan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Coach. I'm equally as big of a fan of your stuff. Our head coach has a couple of your books in our team office right now. So it's ironic that you reached out.
That means a lot. I tell you, I've followed you for a long time, and I tell you, the content you put out is top-notch, and it's really helped me as a coach. It helped our program. And you've put thousands of hours into training, coaching, and breaking down film of receiver plays over the years. And I know when you do that, you start to see patterns and you develop processes that it can really accelerate the development of players. And I'm really eager to pick your brain today and kind of see what you discovered on this journey. And really my first problem that I need you to help me fix with my guys, and I'm talking about back to the ball type of breaks like curls comebacks. Can you highlight some of the common fundamental deficiencies that you see within these styles of routes that are well over 10 yards? You got to maintain your speed. Do you have some drills or teaching methods that you kind of use with your guys to improve their ability to get in and out of these breaks while maintaining speed, eliminating indicators, and reducing the number of steps they need to get those accomplished?
Yeah, so I think some of the most common issues that we run into, and this varies like from high school to even the pro guys that we've been fortunate enough to work with, is a lot of guys feel the need to rush their break points, which ends up leading to guys, their dry foot slipping or them kind of getting stuck on their dry foot. And what will happen is their upper body will leave the break. So if I'm running a curl to my left, my upper body will start leaning out of the break point, leaving my center of mass behind in a sort of way. And that dry foot will get extended too far out. And what I like to tell the guys is it's like socks on a tile floor. So when your feet get really wide and you have socks on a tile floor, your feet will slide out, right? And that analogy usually sticks with kids very, very fast, versus when your feet are directly under your hips, they won't slide out because the force is going straight down. Now, the caveat there is that the foot will get slightly outside of your frame as the drive foot. It's hard to push laterally when the foot is directly under the hip, but there's a point of diminishing returns, right? So one of the most common and probably the most common issue in the break point, we'll say, is that guys try to leave early, right? So we tell guys you want to be smooth in the break. We never rush break points. We're aggressive and fast into break points. We're smooth through break points. It never really ends well when we try to rush out early before we've completed our break, essentially. And then the second most common issue would be, like you had mentioned, any type of indicator. So guys, they won't trust their break point, or they'll be super cognizant of their break point, which will take away from their vertical stem, whether that be speed in their stem, body language before the break point, all sorts of things like that. I'm a huge believer, and I love break points. I love coaching break points as a wide receiver coach. An efficient and smooth break point is one of the most aesthetically pleasing things as a coach there is. But we cannot sacrifice our stem for our break point, because that's like us being in a car chase and putting your blinker on, right? If I'm telling the guy, whether that be change in body language, change in stride, change in arm action prior to what we call the hip drop, which should initiate the break point, we're telling them we're breaking. That's essentially what an indicator is. So what will happen is a lot of players, a lot of athletes will be so hyper-focused on having the perfect break point that they end up providing some type of indicator prior to breaking. So the first thing, really, what we look to do is make sure guys are able to enter the break point and feel good initiating their break point, feel comfortable initiating their break point without any type of indicator. So if early on they end up taking a few extra steps due to the speed they're entering the break point with, then so be it, right? Over time, our drill work, right, and we're pretty confident in the drill work and the system that we have in place, will reduce those steps, because they're going to become a little bit more comfortable absorbing force, like whole foot of ground contact, how the feet strike the ground. They're going to be more comfortable with their body positions in the break point. But for me, the most important thing is how we're getting to the break point. We want to be full stride, aggressive body language, no indicator, which that terminology has been thrown around all over the place.
So you have some like everyday kind of drills that you utilize to help get the feel of that. And how do you coach getting out of that break without taking more steps than not, or making sure they're coming back downhill hard, attacking the ball?
Yeah, we have like a pretty good hard break progression, which has been tried and tested, right? I'll go back and watch our like 2020 and 2021 training film. And at that time, I thought it was great. And it's always evolving, right? So the first thing we'll do is make sure they can feel the breakpoint position. So this is borderline stationary or kind of jogging in place. And they'll just work their sudden drop. Okay, so there's one variation where the feet are ground. They stay grounded and they're just working a stationary hip drop, right? Can they get in that position? The hips are pulling the chest down. The arms are staying tight to the body, and they'll hold that position. We'll then progress to what we call short drops, where we're kind of upright jogging in place. And the reason we want to be upright is because on most of these routes that require this violent drop, right, these hard breaks, we're at a depth of usually 10 plus, like you had mentioned previously, 10, 12 plus, which means we're going to be relatively upright because the acceleration phase is done, right? We've accelerated through the first 10 to 12 yards. We're going to be relatively upright, similar to that of a sprinter coming out of the blocks, and then they get to eventually max velocity phase. Now, the distances are different, but the concept is the same. So we want to be upright while we work these quote unquote short drops. And then there'll be 3 cones laid out in front. And at each cone now, instead of being stationary with the feet grounded, we'll add the ground contacts to the hip drop. I post this drill all the time, and it's an everyday drill for us. So whether we're doing hard breaks, speed cuts, releases that day, whatever it may be, like it's essentially part of the warm up. So now we add the break point, the ground contacts to the break position. And we're looking for whole-footed ground contacts. I think one of the most misconceptions, the biggest misconceptions, and one of the most common things we see is when guys first do this drill, they're on their toes, they're really, really fast footwork. It's not about how fast the feet are, it's about how the feet interact with the ground, right? It's not about tap dancing, it's about intent between each ground contact. There's got to be force applied into the ground to decelerate. So we want them to feel that for the first time in this drill. They're going to feel their feet strike the ground. That's what's going to kind of pull the hips down, which is going to then pull the chest down. So previously, the feet were grounded. Now we're going to add some ground contacts to the hip drop. So we're still not linear. There's still no vertical stem here, but they're now introducing the ground contacts with the hip drop. From there, we'll now apply it on the run with the vertical stem, which is our red light, green light series, where they'll start in a wide out stance now. and they'll get a go call. They'll then get a drop call. The goal here is for them to find that same body position that they just found, but now on the move. Now, it's obviously harder because you're going to have speed going into it, but the progression like that kind of aids guys to kind of feel what that should feel like now on the move. And this is essentially the break point without an exit, right? So they're not going to exit yet. They're just going to continue forward in their break, and then they'll get a ball on the exit coming forward at them. But this is really good because it helps guys kind of feel how the feet should strike in relation to one another, right? We're talking about 12, 15-yard, 45-degree breaks. Some guys are like, it's got to be 3 steps. I've watched so much film, man. Like, there is like a handful of guys that are getting out of 15-yard comebacks in 3 steps. It's not really a real thing. The only time that really happens is if somebody's working something in their stem, which then causes them to decelerate. So that 15-yard comeback is now like a 7-yard comeback because they've worked a hezi or a stutter at 7 or 8. You know what I mean? So the speed going into that break point is reduced a bit. But if guys are really like driving off the ball and they're getting a full vertical stem to 15 yards, man, I could count on one hand how many times I've seen guys get out in 3 steps. One thing that really changed our guys' break points was once they initiate the break, like starting to turn to their reception area. So it becomes more important the more, depending on what the break point is, but we do it on all breaks. So for me to work down my stem on something like a vertical curl, I can't be facing forward and try to exit back down, right? So once our hips drop, like the break is initiated, I want to start to turn and rotate my body in the direction of where I want my reception area to be. So whether that be a vertical curl down my stem, whether that be a curl to my left, whether that be a dig to my left, once my hips drop, I want to start to rotate my body there. Now, the big thing here is the way my feet strike the ground, my body position doesn't change. My hips are still down, my chest is still over, my arms are still tight to my body. But now instead of breaking completely forward, I'm going to start to rotate myself in the direction I want to go. Because once the hips drop, right, like if we do our job as wideouts, the indicator for the cover defender is the hips dropping, right? That should be the first thing that he sees that says, oh, a break is coming, his foot's in the ground and driving. Once that hip drop takes place, they're not waiting for us to pick a side. I wish they would, but they're not. Their foot's in the ground. So now it becomes, what's the fastest way to get to my reception area? If it's a dig, it's flat out to my left. If it's a curl, it's back to the quarterback. If it's a vertical curl, it's back down my stem. It's not good to continue going away from my reception area. I want to start to turn my body, and now my curls that were digs now become real curls because my body's in a position to run down that way. My comebacks that look like square outs now become real comebacks because my body's in a position to run that way. And same thing with vertical curls. That's one thing that I meant to mention previously about the break points. But that's probably been one of the most important things, that and just letting guys feel the rhythm in the break point.
Coaches, Mike has a YouTube clinic that he goes in depth on talking about this exact thing and shows you film. So I'll add that to the show notes, but it does a real good job of explaining what we're talking about here.
I'm more of like, is the body position good? And are they entering the break with speed? Because nobody's going to consciously try to, like, we're going to drill it to reduce the steps. But like, I've seen the same kid get out in 4 and 5. And what it really comes down to is what foot they end up dropping on. Right. So I'm not telling kids what foot they need to drop on, especially when it's versus press coverage or there's somebody in your stem and now they're running hips with you. That can't be on the forefront of our brain because subconsciously we're just going to reduce speed because we're so worried about dropping on the appropriate foot. So I'm not a step in the break guy. Now we want to reduce the steps. If a guy's taking 6 steps, I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to reduce that. But I don't want them to feel like the number of steps dictates the quality of the break. I've seen guys get out in 5 better than some guys get out in 3. What really ends up dictating the number of steps in what I've experienced on deeper curls and comebacks is what foot they end up dropping on. So if they're running a comeback and they drop on their outside foot, if it's a clean break point, it's typically going to be a 4-step break. If they're dropping on their inside foot, it's typically going to be a 5-step break. Now, you may see some guys get out in their 15-yard comebacks, but check their angle out. It typically ends up being a square out that rounds down, right? So now you're reducing 2 steps, but the angle isn't what you want it to be. That's like a coach's preference type of deal. Some guys will be able to get out in 3 at 15, but most commonly it ends up being, if you're dropping on your outside foot on a comeback, inside foot on a deeper curl, it's going to be 4-step. If you're dropping on your inside step on a comeback, outside foot on a deeper curl, it's going to be 5 steps from what I've seen at all levels too.
What about teaching receivers the rhythm element of routes? What's your approach when teaching receivers route breaks, depths, and timing? Do you prefer off steps or yards? Does it depend on the route?
Where I'm at Oceanside High School, we do depths. I think the step stuff gets a little difficult for kids, kind of like paralysis by analysis type of deal. It would take a lot of time for them to get used to it. And then for me, that stuff is out the window when somebody comes down in their stem. But I do think there's a ton of benefit of doing that versus access, right? Because now it's just the same rhythm, the same timing every single time, for sure. Like our quick game stuff is all step counted. I haven't really done step counts for hard breaks like curls, comebacks, things like that. But we have 2-step out, 4-step out, 6-step out, 3-step slant, 5-step glance, right? Like those are all step count routes versus access.
What about in terms of stance? Do you have a hard, fast rule, outside foot?
I'm pretty lenient. I'm super lenient on that. So this is where it gets a little different in the private sector because we work with guys from 50 different schools. So we got to coach it based on how their OC wants it. It's not about, it's selfish of me to say, your OC is wrong. We're doing it this way because now I'm harming the kid, right? Like it's not about an ego thing. It's about how can we get this kid better for his scheme because they're dictating who's playing over there. So we kind of cater that to what their offense wants. So like all the college guys we work with, like their offenses are all different. There's a ton of similarities, but the intricacies of how the coaches want things are different. So we have some guys that we work with that their coaches are super lenient about what foot they have up. We have some guys that we work with who they have to have inside foot, have to have outside foot. So we'll kind of cater that to the specific scheme of the kid. But my personal preference is like you can have whichever foot you want up. That's my personal preference. So long as you don't have the same foot up for one, like there are ways to change tendencies. Like I don't believe in that tendency thing because once 2 or 3 times, let's say every time a kid has his right foot up, he runs a slant. Well, the one time he doesn't have his right foot up, there's no more tendency. Or now it's a run play and he has his right, you know what I mean? So there are ways to break tendencies. I don't believe in that personally. I really don't. Like just from watching as much NFL and college film, like guys have whatever foot they want up. Are you getting to the right spot at the right time? And are you open? If the answer is yes, like they don't care how you do it. You could hop up and down on one leg. We don't have that same freedom with all the guys we work with. So again, we have to cater it to what their offensive coordinators, what their position coaches want them to do, and then kind of try to implement best possible situations for that.
What's a common fundamental breakdown that you have to correct when you're working with guys or new guys with stance and start?
That's a great question. So like this is like the greatest combo ever in receiver play right now, like the stance and start combo. Man, I think it's always somewhere in the middle, right? So what is a false step? What's not a false step? I do believe if you're in a stance and you don't move, there's going to have to be some type of dip, some type of loading of, in my opinion, it should typically be the back leg kind of loading up a little bit, not picking up and stepping down, but there's going to be a little bit of loading to explode off the ball. The most common issue with stance and start for me would probably be that there's not enough tension in the back foot. So what I mean by that is, like we'll tell guys all the time, like you want to imagine building like a track block behind your back foot. Like the back heel is going to be off the ground. The back toe is going to be dug into the ground. I like to tell the younger kids, like we should see the crease in your back, in the cleat of your back foot. Because that tells me that now there's tension and I'm really going to be pushing off that back foot. The front foot is really holding me up. And like I want to get to a good shin angle to be able to accelerate. Right. So that front foot might drop a little bit. For me, that's not a false step, in my personal opinion. But for me, the back foot's got to be loaded up because that's what's pushing me off the ball. Right? Like the back foot is what pushes me off. The front foot is really just kind of holding me. So that's my opinion on stance and start. I think stance and start's the most overcoached thing in football, personally. I know that's really not a common thought. The reason I say that is because we've seen thousands of receivers with thousands of different stances and thousands of different starts be successful. I think they need to be comfortable and explosive. If it looks explosive and they feel comfortable, it's good. And it's not going to look the same for everybody. So to try and fit everybody into one metaphorical box, I don't think is really practical.
So my next problem has to do with release strategies versus press man. I mean, I know as a coach that I can help my guys with motion and stacks, but what are some tools that you teach a receiver that may be undersized against a more physical defender and man to try to give him an advantage to get off the line of scrimmage cleanly?
The first thing I'm going to tell him is don't plant his foot right on the line of scrimmage. Like, I'm going to tell him to take as much, because refs, you don't have to be planted directly on the ball, right? Like, there's usually a wiggle room there, and the ref will tell you to move up if he doesn't deem you on the ball. So my first piece of advice would be take as much space as you can, right? So, like, don't walk up there, look at the ball, and plant whatever foot on the ball, right? See if you can steal a few inches, maybe a foot of space. The next thing I would say is read, like, film study and body language of the cover defender is going to tell you how aggressive this guy's going to play. It's week 9 and the guy hasn't played jump jam all season. It's unlikely he's going to jump jam now, right? Or what are the tendencies that he is going to shoot forward on the snap? You're typically going to see a little bit more forward lean. You might see a little bit of a staggered stance. You might see the hands come up a bit higher, right? So trying to find tendencies when the jam is going to come forward. The next thing I would say is, like, I think the wide out position, the wide out community, we've done a really good job coaching the position. Like, I think the position has evolved. That goes from position coaches, that goes from the private sector, just in totality. But I don't think we coach enough of finishing through hands versus, like, blading and getting wide around hands. Like, for me, our release path has to be wider than the DB, right? Like, the DB's goal is to stay square. He wants to take a charge in basketball terms. So for us to counteract that, we have to end up stepping wider than him. Okay. And that doesn't mean we're pushing out laterally completely. Like, we're not in U's, we're in V's, right? We're width and depth at the same time when we exit or release. Well, once I've gotten wider than him, my release path is wider than him, there's only one thing he can do, and that's punch, right? He's going to have to shoot his hands. And unless it's jump jam, it's typically going to be on the exit, not so much to the breastplate, unless we didn't do a good job and he was able to stay square. So that tells me I know his hands are coming. I have to finish through them. Like, I don't want to avoid them and get wide and give him an angle to overtake me. Like, I know his hands are coming, so I'm going to combat them and finish through them. I've been really big on, like, chopping down. Like, I want to finish down on them rather than shedding back, because shedding back tends to keep the guy with you, whereas chopping down will end up putting me in a blade and I'll be able to stack a little bit with a little bit more urgency. Now, smaller guys might have to shed. It might be hard for them to get on top of longer corners, but I've seen smaller guys get really, really efficient with chopping down on top.
This kind of leads us into the next question. Let's talk about fade ball or go route, whatever you call it. What are some non-negotiables that you got to get your receivers to understand when running the vertical route down the field? And this could be against press man, or it could be press bail, man or zone. What are some things that you got to really, like, hone in on to make sure they can execute that effectively?
Yeah, the first thing is they've got to understand where the reception area is, right? So when I look for the ball at the 20 going in is a lot different than when I look for the ball on the 40 going in. Now, depending on where the offense is trying to complete the ball, right? If this is off play action and this thing's getting thrown 45 yards downfield, well, man, I'm digging out and I'm fighting to stack. Like, we probably aren't looking for this thing until 30 yards downfield, 25 yards downfield, which gives me a ton of time to win the route, right? Like, I think there's a misconception about you don't have to dominate at the line of scrimmage. Like, there's really 3 or 4 points to win, right? It's, you can win at the release, you can win in the stem, you can win at the break point, you can win at the catch point. Now, there's no break point on a vert, but a lot of guys, like, if you watch a guy like Mike Evans doesn't always dominate people at the line of scrimmage, but he's exceptional in his stem and he's exceptional at the catch point, right? I think that a ton of coaching takes place on the release, and this includes myself. Like, we don't do a good enough job coaching combat in stem, stacking in stem, and hand fighting in stem, right? You could lose a go ball up until there was a rep from Puka Nacua. I want to say it was against Seattle. Oh, no, it might have been against Philly. I think it was Bradbury. If you froze the rep up until the catch point, he was like, there's no way this guy's winning. But he ended up clearing the hands late, leaning the stack late, and winning the go ball, right? I think that we need to continuously coach, like, hand fighting in stem all the way up till the catch point. The problem with that is it's hard to authentically coach it because go balls are expensive, right? How many go balls are you going to be able to run before a guy's hamstrings are hanging off the bone?
Right.
So that's something that we've kind of played around with. We've done things like stack the stacker, where, like, it's a live release, and then we'll set up cones like 15 yards downfield. We're trying to finish through the cones before the DB. I got that from Coach Callahan at Monmouth, who's also fantastic. But yeah, that's a harder thing to coach, but we found some ways to do it. And it doesn't even have to be like 100%. You just want guys to give effort, because to get authentic hand fighting, there's got to be a speed element to it. The stationary stuff is great, and there's a time and place for it, and we do it. But it's a different animal when you're exiting the line of scrimmage and you're running. You know what I mean? Because everything's happening so fast. So finding ways to get guys in those authentic situations where they can really hand fight on the run has been super, super beneficial for the guys we work with.
Next question I got has to do with really game preparation. How do you teach receivers to watch film of an upcoming opponent, and what should they be taking away or applying in their mental preparation through the week?
Yeah, so we get a lot of vanilla coverages here at the high school level. So we're going to know for the most part what coverage we're going to get. So we're really trying to identify our cover defender. So like, how does he deal with different route stems, right? So when we have a go ball, we inside stem, what does he do? Does he squat? Does he shift inside? Does he lift? Right? Because now that's going to dictate how we attack things like dagger, right? If I stem at him and he lifts, I could just stay on it and roll. If I stay at him and he shifts and he matches it inside, I'm going to have to press it back vertical to get him to flip. So we're more based on, I would say, our cover defenders doing more than anything. We don't get a ton of like disguised looks and stuff. Football's growing a ton on Long Island, but we just don't have a ton of intricate defenses. I would say like identifying down and distance, how cover defenders play different things at down and distance. We'll typically only get pressed to the boundary, and guys will play differently. Like a couple of years ago, there was a team we played where every time we were to the boundary and it was like third and I would say medium to long, you get a hard corner and you get the safety over the top. So that's something that we need to identify, right? Okay, third and X yards, you're going to get jump jammed. You're going to get pressed. You need to prepare for it. Here's our plans. Here's what we're going to do for it. So that season, we really didn't do much hard press work. That week, we did a ton of hard press work in Indy. So down and distance, how our cover defenders play differently would be the two biggest things.
Next problem that I have, and I got to do a better job of, is practice and game management with my receivers. How should I balance a number of vertical routes run during practice to ensure my guys are fresh on game day? Or how do I manage subbing receivers in game to ensure they can be top speed at every play? I mean, you played this position, put yourself back when you were playing. You know, is there some things as coaches that we need to be cognizant of during the game or during practice to make sure our guys are maintaining top speed every rep?
Yeah, man, I think there's a lot of really good stuff out there on that right now. I would say if you have a deep room and a guy runs a vertical, like get him off. Especially if you're a tempo team, he shouldn't even think about coming back to the huddle. He should just be trotting right off the field and the next guy's in for him for two reasons, right? So now you can play faster. And let's be honest, he just ran 40 to 50 yards as fast as he can. Like, he's not going to be full speed in 20 seconds. Like, it is what it is. It's really not up for debate. This is physiology, right? He will not be full speed. Okay, like you can't say he's got to be meant to. No, it's physiology. There's no gray area here. So I would say things like that. So in practice, we do that all the time. We throw a go ball, it's caught or it's not caught. Like, that guy's not even back in. Like, next guy's in for him. And then he'll come back in, but that next play he's not in. We do a ton of tempo stuff also. So it's a two-pronged answer. And then this is a hard conversation to have because I was a performance coach before anything. And I was able to intern with some really, really smart people. There's not enough time in the week to not go full speed every day, but you're not going to be fully recovered. If you have guys running high volume, high intensity speed work, which is basically route running, right? If the tempo is live 3 days in a row, they're not going to recover by game day. It is what it is. They'll find a way, and they're young kids, right? So they're super adaptable. So they'll find a way and they'll be fine, but their nervous system's not recovered. You know what I mean? So if there was a way to get a high-low approach in the football week, I think that would be best. Just being cognizant of, okay, so-and-so ran 600 yards of high-intensity sprinting at practice yesterday. Maybe we'll tone it down tomorrow. And that doesn't mean you can't get work done. It's just, you're just cognizant of it. That's why all these higher-level programs are wearing GPS monitors, is to track their data for that reason, essentially. It might be more so for injury prevention stuff, but it's essentially the same thing.
My last question is something that's dear to my heart, is perimeter blocking. What some common fundamental issues or breakdowns that you see with guys that you got to keep them aware of to maintain good leverage and block?
Yeah, the two most common things that I see, guys, they're out of control. Like, they close the distance out of control. and then they end up just whiffing. And we have a rule like you can do anything but whiff, right? Because that's just lack of focus for me. It's like you just run at the guy out of control, and now you don't have enough time to break down and match him, so he runs right by you. And then the other thing is that I think guys think every block has to be this kill shot, even like a pancake. Like all you got to do is put your body in between the ball and the man for the most part. So those would be the two most common things I've seen. I think the most impactful thing that you can do for wide out blocking is getting them to buy in. Like I don't really think like it's definitely a skill, but for me, it's more of a mindset. Like when I was in high school and even in college, like if you asked the head coach like who your best blocking receiver was, like it rarely was the most athletic kid, right? Which tells me it's not really an athlete or like a skill thing as much as it is like you just got to want to do it. Like it's dirty, it's nasty, but you just got to want to do it. I think getting the guys to buy in and really like find the value in it will go way further than any drill that you could do. Now, that's a hard thing to do, but you got to set the standard. Like guy doesn't block early in camp, like he's out, his reps get cut. And then people are going to realize, okay, why is our best guy not getting as many reps, right? Like that sets the standard. It sucks for a little bit, but it can't be one guy, especially at the high school level. When you're talking about the NFL and there's like millions of dollars being thrown around, like, yeah, like AB didn't block much. Like Randy Moss didn't block much. That's all good and well, but we're not dealing with NFL guys. You and I, we're dealing with high school guys. So I think that goes a long way. Like if you take your all-county receiver who doesn't want to block and you just let him keep getting by with not blocking, well, why will the third receiver then want to block hard every play? It's got to be a standard across the room. So I think that standard has to be set. And when it's not met, guys lose playing time. I think it has to be set early. That way there's no kind of questions asked about it.
Who are some of your favorite guys to watch receiver play wise? You know, this could be college, NFL, but if you were going to point us to, hey man, I know, you know, talent is a part of that, but if you had to teach some of your kids that you coach, hey, you need to really watch this guy, who would those be?
I would say 5 guys that immediately come to mind. They're like kind of a little different. Like for me, Julio Jones is like teach tape. And it's so interesting because what would be considered a bigger bodied receiver, but he can do everything, right? Like he got in and out of break points as well as anybody. He ran through his pressure steps and speed cuts as well as anybody. He was able to go get the ball. He was able to attack vertically. Like his drive phase off the ball was maybe the best ever of all time. So for me, Julio Jones is like the overall fundamental guy to watch. And then in a different little bucket would be like Devontae, Keenan Allen, and Stevie Johnson. I think they have a very similar style in how they play. They're like masters of tempo. They can do all 3 things very well. They were all able to drop their hips well. So like there are 3 foundational receiver movements. It's like, can you drop your hips? Can you run through your speed cuts and pressure steps? And then can you move somebody? Can you shift somebody who's on a landmark? Can you get them off their platform? I think all 3 of those guys are elite at that. Stevie was elite at it. Keenan and Devontae have shown over a decade now that they're all elite at it. So I love watching those guys. And the other thing about Keenan and Devontae is like they're world-class freak athletes, but their testing numbers were not like these alien numbers. You know what I mean? So I think it's cool for kids to see that who might be in similar buckets from a testing standpoint. Because when you watch them, they were probably like one of the slower people at the combine, right? When you put the film on, it doesn't look like that. You know what I mean? And I think that's really special on their end because they do such a great job making everything look the same. Devontae and Keenan's release package is probably one of the best ever. So those 3 guys are in a similar bucket for me. And then the last guy would be Steve Smith. Steve Smith was a guy who I started studying recently. And I was a huge, and we still coach several different releases at the line of scrimmage. But man, if you're surgical with your hands, it's almost arbitrary what you do with your feet. Because the DB is going to shoot his hands eventually. If we are really efficient with them and strong with them, more times than not, we're going to be pretty damn good. And then his mindset, like the way he played the game, the way he approached the game, I like to call it competitive arrogance. You've worked so hard. You put so much work in the way you handle your work, the way you handle everything, that you know the person that's lining up across from you, they can't hang with you, right? And that's earned, right? So you can't just say, I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. Like that is an earned mindset. One coach I played for was on the Panthers with him, and he said he had never seen anybody practice as hard as Steve Smith. Like his life depended on every single play. And when you put the game film on, it's exactly how he played. And that's not by accident.
He's one of my all-time favorite. There's a Football Life episode out there that covered him. And Jake, if you ever seen it, I watch it every year. It gets me fired up.
Yeah, he's the best, man. He's awesome.
He's a stud. Great. That's some great information, Mike. Mike, you always put content out there on social media, and then you also have an online subscription that gives you access to your drill bank, and then you have made cut-ups of all these guys that you've talked about and more, and that's been really helpful. I use that to teach my guys, and I'm a subscriber, highly recommend it. Can you tell coaches where they can go to get access to this stuff and also to keep up with you?
Yeah, so LIReceiveracademy.com, LI as in like the initials for Long Island, receiveracademy.com is our website. You can find the film room there. I'm also pretty active on Twitter, at WR as in wide receiver, at WR Coach Vannucci. My last name is Vannucci, V as in Victor, ANNUCCI. And there's a link in my bio there as well. There's a bunch of stuff on our YouTube channel too, man. I really just love the position. I'll talk to anybody about it. So anybody that ever wants to talk wideout play, just shoot me a message.
Mike, appreciate you having you on, man. It's been a great time. Got a lot of nuggets here and look forward to continue to follow your success and your career path.
Thank you for having me, Coach. I really appreciate it.
Dub, another detailed, packed episode. I heard someone say the other day that typically they listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed, which I do a lot, but they can't do it because they're taking so many notes. So what do you have for us as far as takeaways for this one?
Well, again, I understand that. I took a ton of notes on this one. And, the things that I like what Mike talked about, going into the details about brake mechanics, was really the number one thing that is a common fundamental breakdown in brake mechanics is rushing the brake point. And so receivers get too quick into the brake point or try to rush the brake point, and that really leads to two common issues. You give indicators, which tells the DB where you're braking, and then the other thing it does is it forces your body to be in a position that negates good separation and speed in and out of the brake. So Mike went in detail some good drills, and I'm not going to rehash those. You can go back and list that, but some of the drills that he uses are some everyday drills to break those issues, and I think that's some things that you're going to want to dive into deeper if you have any issues with that with your guys. I love how he talked about breaking down the stance and start, and one of the primary things he looks at is the back foot. And you really want to treat that back foot as kind of like being in a track block. And what he talks about is having a crease in the cleat and digging that big toe into the ground. And so that a lot of times receivers do not anchor that back foot in properly, and therefore that's where the false steps lead into. And that's some things that can inhibit a receiver being explosive off the line. And then I just loved, there's so many more, but I just love talking about blocking and blocking fundamentals. And Mike just stressing the point that I've always believed in. The first thing you got to do is you got to get buy-in. You got to get those receivers to buy in to how important blocking is. And if you can't get buy-in, really, you're going to struggle as an offense in its entirety. So, again, a lot more there, but that was some of the things that I really enjoyed about the pod. But this is one you're going to listen to and take some more notes on and follow him and to make sure you keep up on the latest stuff he's putting out.
Yeah, I remember Dub going all the way back to, I think it was about 2010. I came out to Oklahoma to see you, and we clinicked for a couple days, and one of those things we talked about that really became a big part of what we did was receiver play, and a big thing eliminating that false step. So this stuff just keeps coming back. I really love that the detail. I think yes, this is something that definitely is for receiver coaches. You should bookmark it, you should come back to it, it should be a resource for you. But when you just hear about the detail that goes into coaching, I think this is for everybody. You can always learn from another position coach and how he does things and the detail that he puts into it.
That's a great point, Keith. I think, what Mike has a system of teaching, and we all need our own type of system with a language and a process. And that's what I liked about him is he has a really simplified, systematic process that anybody can take and implement and help their kids in their program.
Absolutely. Another great one. And Dub, thanks again for your work on this.
Appreciate it, Keith.
Be sure to visit coachandcoordinator.com and check out the 10% Toolkit, which highlights our partners and some of the offers they have to you as a listener. The link to that is in the show notes. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.